Welcome back to JetBlue Park, everybody. I'm Mike Petraglia here in Fort Myers, joined as always by Red Sox senior writer for WEEI.com, Alex Speier. Alex, big day. We're on the eve of the first spring training games for the Red Sox as defending World Series champions. That's not the biggest deal, but the really bigger matter is really developing the talent and getting the players used to game action. John Farrell talked about that today, Wednesday. That's really what you're looking at, is getting the players from really the workouts to game mode. Is that what really fans should really be looking for as these games begin against Northeastern and BC on Thursday?
Well, with the veterans especially, it should measure the way in which you view the performances. I mean, if a guy like Mike Napoli goes 0 for 15 in the first couple weeks of the spring, it doesn't matter. There are people for whom there is something at stake with regards to spring training. It's not necessarily so much in the statistical performance, but instead in kind of how they carry themselves and the abilities overall that they show. So, for instance, there are spots that are open to competition. Most notably, Jackie Bradley kind of still has to prove that he is going to be the everyday center fielder,
right.
Which would also kind of in brackets, there's going to be an assessment of how ready Grady Sizemore is to be a regular player after sitting out these last couple of years. There are questions, in all likelihood there will be an injury at some point that opens up a spot in the bullpen. That's just the reality of attrition with pitching staff. So some of the guys with non-roster invitations, minor league deals to camp, are going to have an opportunity to put their foot forward, guys like Francisco Cordero or Jose Mijares. And then for both those guys who have non-roster invitations, as well as some of the prospects who may never have been in big league camp before, it's an opportunity for them to show the major league staff how they respond in moments in the game. And again, that's not outcome-based. It's more how comfortable do they look if maybe they're at a 1-2 count, do they still have an approach? Or do they panic if they're on the mound and there are a couple of runners on base? From that standpoint, those guys are going to have an opportunity to assert themselves for future call-ups as the season unfolds.
You had an opportunity to ask John Farrell a very interesting question, I thought, and that is, how do you view spring training statistics? You mentioned, like, if Mike Napoli goes 0 for 15 and he bats 185 with, a 340 slugging percentage in spring training, Red Sox aren't going to get that worked up about that, but there are certain statistics that do matter.
Well, there can be, and again, I think that, for instance, the most important one for a pitcher is going to be strike throwing. To start with, guys, especially the prospect types, the Allen Websters of the world need to show that they can consistently repeat their deliveries and throw strikes if they had high walk rates in the past. So the Red Sox will be interested in seeing that sort of thing. But yeah, by and large, again, it's more about the process. It's more about the personality in game competition as opposed to being an evaluation based on statistics.
Let's move on to the guys that will be catching those pitches, and that is obviously A.J. Pierzynski and David Ross. Neither of them are going to be playing in the first couple of games. John Farrell told us here on Wednesday they're going to probably wait until the weekend. And really, Felix Dubron is the first Red Sox regular that will see any action. That, I believe, is on Saturday. But when we talk about the catchers, and specifically A.J. Pierzynski, because he's new to the system, obviously, this is an important camp only insofar as he has to get used to what each one of the starting 5 projected pitchers on the rotation can do in certain game situations. But as he told us, Alex, that really doesn't happen until about 3 or 4 starts deep.
Absolutely, because pitchers start out the spring by just building up arm strength, throwing fastballs, trying to build up their velocity a little bit so that they're ready for the start of the season, and then they start incorporating their breaking balls and their full complement of pitches, start pitching to situations maybe around their 3rd or 4th start of the spring. So that's really going to be the time for the pitcher-catcher dynamic to really take shape. But in the interim, it is important still for A.J. Pierzynski just to see how the stuff works. What's the shape of a John Lester cutter, so that he can get a feel for when that pitch is a useful one to call.
And have confidence, obviously, Alex, in handling it and trusting it, that not only Lester can command it, but that he can catch it in the right situation, frame it, and also if he calls a pitch in the dirt, that he can block it. So that's one aspect to certainly keep an eye on. Finally, I am always entertained by the gentleman that spoke on the park bench outside the Red Sox minor league complex clubhouse today, one Pedro Martinez. He is back for a second year as a special assistant to the general manager and a special assistant to the coaching staff. but it's really how Pedro goes about articulating what he can deliver to the staff that really, to me, is fascinating.
Well, there's no one who has greater credibility than Pedro Martinez when he's talking to pitchers, given that he was one of the most successful pitchers of his generation and really of all time for a stretch. And it was interesting to hear him talk about how he discovered last year his great joy for being a teacher, for being able to work with young prospects, young pitchers, and help them develop. And he talked specifically about a guy like Drake Britton, seeing him in Portland and getting an opportunity to see him make it all the way to the majors. How Pedro described himself as being a proud father for some of the growth on and off the field that he was able to see with a guy like Britton, and that's something that he really relishes. As he's at the same time that he's very excited about the nature of the Red Sox pitching prospect.
Pedro also told us that he was very proud to be part of the Red Sox organization, as last year was really a year that changed the city of Boston, and the Red Sox had a huge part in that. Final quick question. Next year, he's already in the Red Sox Hall of Fame, and that was a no-brainer with Nomar Garciaparra, Joe Castiglione, and obviously Roger Clemens. Next year is his first year of eligibility for Cooperstown. Does he make it?
Of course. He will belong. He didn't hit 300 wins, but he was, for those years, the most dominant of all pitchers in the majors, and so he will be treated as being in the same class as the Maddoxes and the Glemons and the Glavins, who made it in with whopping majorities, clearing easily the 75% bar this year.
All right, Alex, that'll wrap it up for workouts. The spring training games once again begin on Thursday with the Red Sox playing a pair of 7-inning games. First one at 1:05 p.m. Eastern against Northeastern. That'll be followed up by a game against Boston College. He is Alex Speier. I'm Mike Petraglia at JetBlue Park in Fort Myers, WEEI.com.